All right. Welcome again, everybody, to the open mic. I am Rich Eisen, your host here at the open mic, where hopefully you come on a regular basis to hear really good writers talk about writing, their work, the publishing industry, maybe a few questions I throw off the top of my head at them. I am joined today by one of the really great mystery thriller writers anywhere in the world today, one of the most successful, William Kent Krueger. Uh, the Cork O'Connor series, some of his great standalone novels, all hit the New York Times bestsellers list. I'm very honored to have you. Kent, how are you doing today?
All things considered, pretty well, Rich. Despite the coronavirus, and here in Minnesota, we're just crawling out from the bitter winter polar vortex, but we're doing all right.
Yeah, it's actually been here in California. We forget how much the rest of the country uh, endures winter in a way we don't ever have to. You know, I'm out wearing shorts and a t-shirt this afternoon walking my dog, where most of the country is, still huddled up and trying to stay warm. So, well, I'm grateful that the weather gods and the power gods have cooperated here. We can get this going. I will remind everybody, if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button. We'd love to have you join us on a regular basis here. I guarantee it's worth it if you're interested at all in writing yourself or just understanding how great writers work. Um, let's start with your last book, which was from 2019. Uh, it was a standalone novel, though I believe you've also said it was something of a follow-up to the one right before that, Ordinary Grace. Of course, a New York Times bestseller, um, huge hit. For those of the people out there watching this who may not be familiar, tell me a little bit about that book and why I guess what was the story and how it resonated with you.
Sure. For those who have no idea what this Tenderland is about, here's the down and dirty on it. It takes place in the summer of 1932, deep in the Great Depression. It's the story of four orphans running from the law because they've committed a terrible crime, but for the right reason. They know if they take to the roads to try to get away, they'll be caught quickly because a huge manhunt has been launched to capture them. They're afraid to ride the rails as everybody was doing back in the Depression because the railroads back then were patrolled by private cops called bulls. And the bulls had a reputation for being incredibly cruel. So the kids are afraid to ride the rails. Instead, they decide to take to the rivers. They canoe a river called the Gilead to the Minnesota River. They canoe the Minnesota to the Mississippi. And their plan is to canoe all the way down the Mississippi River to St. Louis, where they believe they have family and they'll be safe. This is a story I've wanted to write since I was 11 years old, Rich. When I was 11, that would have been in the fifth grade. Toward the end of that year, our teacher read to the class The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. She did it by reading half an hour after lunch every day. I love that book. There was this kid, he was just like me. He was out there on the Mississippi River having these really great adventures. And of course, after that, I had to read Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which I loved even more. And honestly, across my entire career as a writer, I've wanted someday to write a story that would pay homage to Mark Twain that might be in its own way an updated version of Huckleberry Finn. And so for me, that's what this Tender Land is, my updated version of Huckleberry Finn.
Well, and I love that it's set in that era because there is um, such an immediacy now with everything, text messaging and direct messaging and everything's, everyone's got a video camera in their pocket, etc. It's such a different time for somebody in that situation. They probably really could escape to some extent. And that makes it a very different experience than somebody who maybe would be trying to do that in the year 2021.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Rich. I hate to take my cell phone with me everywhere because I don't want to be always connected to the rest of the world. I want some time away. So yeah, particularly back in the summer of 1932, it was not difficult to lose yourself a little bit in the way we can't really do that these days. Although in my Cork O'Connor series, where he's way up north in the Great North Woods, cell phone service there can be as iffy as I need it to be for the sake of the plot.
Absolutely. Well, we're definitely going to talk about Cork O'Connor. Let me ask you just really quickly, Are you working on anything new right now that's imminent? I presume you are because writers write. So tell me what it is you're working on.
Yeah, you got it. Writer's right. It's what we do. Um, I just turned in what I believe are the final revisions to the next book in my Cork O'Connor series. It will be number 18, a novel called Lightning Strike. It's scheduled to be published in this coming August. I am within spitting distance of finishing the first draft for the next book in my Cork O'Connor series, a novel called Jawbone Creek. And I'm hoping that I'll have cleared the decks and be able to begin working on my next standalone novel, which will be a companion to both Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land.
Wow, that is a full plate. That's really great. Well, and for those who may not have ever got into the Cork O'Connor series, I highly recommend it. I am not blowing smoke. Kent is fabulous, and one of the things I love about it, I really uh, love and appreciate the inclusion of Native American people, voices, spirituality, legends. These are a very central theme throughout the whole Cork O'Connor series. Tell me more about how you chose to have Native Americans have this role in this series.
Well, I have to be honest with you. The initial impulse was a mercenary one. I've been trying to write the great American novel forever, to no great avail. And when I hit my early 40s, I kind of went through a midlife crisis and said, to hell with trying to write the great American novel. I want to write something somebody might actually want to read. And so I looked around me to see what people read. You know what everybody reads, Rich? They read mysteries. It's a genre whose appeal cuts across all socioeconomic levels. So I decided I was going to write a mystery. Now, here's a confession coming from a mystery writer. Before I began to write mysteries, I didn't read them. My father was a high school English teacher, and he convinced me that mysteries were the poor stepchildren of literature. So I didn't even read Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys when I was growing up. So I had a lot to learn, and I began my learning process by reading. And one of the first people I stumbled across, thank you, Lord, was Tony Hillerman. For those out there who might not know who Tony Hillerman was, he was an icon in the mystery genre. He created a series that's set in the Four Corners area of the Southwest and that deals significantly with the culture of the Navajo, culture of the Diné. And I looked at Minnesota and I thought, you know, nobody's doing anything like that with the Ojibwe, with the Anishinaabeg here in Minnesota. Maybe that's what I ought to do. So that was the initial impulse. But I have to tell you, writing the Cork O'Connor stories, uh, having come to make significant friendships within the Native community, I have come to a rich appreciation, admiration for the Native cultures, the Indigenous people here. Here and everywhere, actually. And so I, what I do with my Cork O'Connor series, quite honestly, is just scratch the surface of a very rich, ancient, complex culture. But if in doing so, I'm able to give readers a sense of the beauty of that culture, then I'm doing something okay.
Yeah, I think there's always, and you mentioned Tony Hillerman, who is absolutely one of my very favorite authors. I think I've read every word he ever wrote. And, you know, I always had tremendous respect for how he went about it because not being a member of the Navajo tribe, he took the time, made the effort to really learn and understand what he was talking about and to make sure that those portrayals were accurate. And both good and bad. I mean, I think sometimes some authors tend to romanticize a culture if they want to write about it as opposed to writing, characters as real people. And it's one of the things I love about the Cork O'Connor series. The same thing. These are very real people, good, bad, flawed, etc. Um, did you immerse yourself in that same way to the way Tony did to be sure that you were accurately portraying those voices?
Well, I'm accurately portraying them from the standpoint of a white guy who has no native blood in him whatsoever. I am, cultural appropriation is a significant discussion that we're having these days, and it's an appropriate discussion to have. Whenever I write story, particularly my Coco Connor series, I'm painfully aware that I'm a white guy trespassing on a culture not my own. So I work pretty hard to get it right. I do due diligence in my research. I have friends in the Native community. Whenever I have finished a manuscript for the Corco Connor series, I give it to at least one of my Ojibwe friends, usually more than that, to read and vet, so that I haven't said anything that's stupid or even worse, offensive. So yeah, I work really hard to get it all right. I don't linger on those aspects of the Ojibwe culture that would feed into the stereotypes that people have. There are certainly members of the Ojibwe culture who have substance abuse issues, who are not particularly kind to their wives or their children. But you know, there are white people who have substance abuse issues and maybe beat their wives and their children. And they don't do it, we don't say they do it because they're white, you know?
Right.
Um, and so one of the things that I try to do, as you've pointed out, is create the Ojibwe as people. I mean, there are Ojibwe plumbers and doctors and lawyers and teachers and nurses and wastewater workers. You know, they're just regular people who see the world through a perspective of their particular culture.
Right. Well, one of the other, I almost said cultural group, and that's absolutely not right. One of the other consistent characters, a group of characters in your books are politicians, many of whom are less than ethical folks, shall we say. Uh, Tell me a little bit more about the politician as foil. And I'm asking as a political reporter, someone who covers politics for a living. I absolutely understand them being the bad guys a lot of times. Tell me a little bit about how that came to be. It had such a constant thread in your books.
Well, you'll see three types of villains in my book. Politicians are certainly one, very rich people are another, and large corporations are another. And these are very often people who, in order to get where they are or to maintain the position that they have lost their moral center. And so they become characters that are easy to create villains out of. You know, if you think political, you know, if you're going to rise in the political system that we have, you have to be, first of all, you have to have an enormous ego. And you probably have to do an enormous amount of compromising. And I think in the end, those combinations can be lethal to the character of a person.
Yeah, well, that's what they always say about the presidency. 50% of the job is just wanting it in the first place, because the vast majority of us would not want to, give up our privacy and our lives and all the other things that come with it. But I suppose if you do,
You know, yeah,
um,
I don't want to stereotype politicians as all evil people. There are people still at work who have the best interests of the rest of us at heart. They exist and they're out there. Otherwise, our system probably would have completely fallen apart by now.
okay.
But typically, those aren't the people I'll write about.
You've mentioned Minnesota quite a bit, and of course that's where the Cork O'Connor series is. But um, in the past, you've talked about the importance of giving readers a sense of place. It's another thing I really like about that series. And any great book, and whether we talk about Hillerman or Walter Mosley's L.A. of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you can go on down the line, because it becomes, to me, a character unto itself, and it's very enriching for a reader. Tell me more about how you approach that sense of place in your work.
Yeah, I write profoundly out of a sense of place, Rich, as do most of the writers whose work I admire. You've named several of them already. James Lee Burke, I would add to that. Dennis Lehane, South Boston, I would add to that. Michael Connolly, his LA, I would add to that. Louise Penny, her Three Pines in Canada, I would add to that. CJ Box, Craig Johnson, we all write profoundly out of a sense of place. And as you so aptly point out, place is a character, a significant character in the story. In some ways, I think maybe the most important character. When I teach writing, or back in the days when I used to teach writing, I would always teach place before I taught character, because character rises out of place, plot rises out of place, motivation rises out of place. And so grounding the reader in the culture of the place, the face of the place, the sense of all the sensual aspects of the place, gives the reader really, really excellent footing for enjoying the story and feeling like they are immersed in the story. But I have to tell you honestly, when I write a set of story in Minnesota, there's something else at work as well. I'm not native to Minnesota. I didn't move here until I was about 30 years old. So that my wife could go to the University of Minnesota Law School here in the Twin Cities. And before that, I was a gypsy kid. I lived all over the place. I never really had anywhere that I called or thought of as home. But I swear to you, the minute I set foot in Minnesota, I knew I'd found home. I fell in love with this place and with its people. So when I write a story set in Minnesota, whether I'm dealing with the Great North Woods of the Cork O'Connor series, or southern Minnesota, the agrarian beauty of Ordinary Grace or This Tender Land, it's really kind of a love letter to this adopted home of mine. I want readers to appreciate this place as much as I do.
Well, you certainly convey all of its beauty in your work, and again, I really admire that when you are reading a story and you can so clearly visualize um, every little element we're talking about. And it really is an art as much as a skill. I mean, it's really a thing of beauty. And people have images in their head of what a place is like. So, you mentioned, you think of Minnesota, a lot of people think of the snow, et cetera, or Alaska, wherever you think California. I think people that don't live in California think we all live on the beach, which is not true. Um, but you're also working when you're setting that sense of place. Do you ever feel a sense that you're also working with those stereotypes in the heads of people who don't live there or haven't been there, who maybe you're dealing with those expectations in some way? Or is that just way too much for you to have to think about when you're trying to write a story?
Well, some of the expectations are based in reality. You think of northern Minnesota, Paul Bunyan Company, you think the Great North Woods, you think pristine lakes and fast rivers, and it's true. Uh, but that's just the general aspect. I mean, like any character, you can say this character is a big man. Well, that's a good start, but then you start by talking about what's the eye color and how's the face shaped and what does the man smell like and how does he sound, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same with creating a sense of place. I go about creating a sense of place in the same way I would create a character. I mean, places have faces and they're sometimes beautiful and sometimes not, and they actually have smells, and some of those smells are good and some of them are not, and they have culture to them, they have a voice to them. And so I try to bring in all of those aspects when I'm grounding the reader in my sense of place, giving them a good setting.
You noted that you've taught writing. Um, and I think for anyone watching this who's an aspiring writer, which is probably everybody, um, you get so much information in this day and age. And a lot of it's bad. Some of it's good, but a lot of it's bad. What is maybe the best writing advice you ever received in your career, whether it was from a teacher or from a fellow writer or, a guy at the coffee shop, what have you? What stuck with you the most when you were first realizing, hey, I think I really want to do this and go for it?
um, Hemingway was one of my early idols. And one of the things I knew about Hemingway is that he loved nothing better than to rise at first light and spend the first 2 hours of day writing. He thought was the most creative time of the day, and he wrote every single day. That's what I've done for the last 40 years. And so one of the first things I've always advised my students or anyone who's contacted me is write every single day. Stay connected with the energy of your project or just the energy of the writing itself. Write because you love what you do, not because you have any expectation that you're going to get rich and famous from it. But here are two things that I keep in mind after I became a published writer. The first was this: somebody else's success is not my failure. So as I've watched my colleagues receive accolades and have their books transformed into movies, I try to celebrate their successes. And the other is this: comparison is the thief of joy. Don't compare yourself to what other people are doing, what other writers are doing successfully or not. Just enjoy, focus on what you can do, and enjoy what you accomplish.
That's great advice because, I think in anything that we do, it's always unfortunate because awards are given out, accolades are given out, and you've won many, many of the most prized awards in the industry. But it does feel like um, all works are so different, even if they're in the same genre. That competition, whether it's in, the performing arts or, things like books or music or whatever, it's hard to glean the value of something just from that. And yet that's the situation a lot of people are put in. So it's really nice to hear someone say, that comparison is the killer of joy. I think it's great advice.
There are all kinds of arbitrary gauges for success. Reviews, sales, awards, and they're arbitrary. They're simply arbitrary. And so what I try to adopt myself, and it's not always easy, and try to suggest to other writers is, the only gauge of success that you ought to be looking at is how do you feel about what you've accomplished.
Yeah. Well, conversely, what's maybe the worst advice you've given? Like, say, a lot of the advice that's out there, there's a million craft books out there. Everyone's got an opinion. The industry has a lot of standard tropes and things that, I think scare a lot of aspiring writers. What's maybe the worst advice or a general theme you hear that you try to dissuade aspiring writers from paying too much attention to?
Sure. Don't write what's hot right now. It won't be hot next year. And the other reason you shouldn't do that, I mean, you're absolutely right, Rich. There are so many voices out there telling you what you ought to write. Um, this is what people will buy. This is what the publisher wants. This is what editors are looking for. And that's the worst piece of advice anybody could give you is, pay attention to those voices. The best piece of advice is listen to your own heart. Write what your heart tells you ought to be writing, because in the end, A, you're going to be happier with what you do, and B, I think that's what's going to open the doors for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, you would tend to think, because we're always told write what you know. I think what I'm hearing and what I've had other writers tell me too is more along the lines of write what you love or write, the thing that you know, but also that, you really wanting to be passionate about because it's such a long slog. A novel is a long slog and it's going to have a fair share of rejection and change and all that stuff along the way. You might as well really enjoy it as opposed to making it a slog, mental, emotional slog.
Yeah, one of the points I have tried to make with my students is that writing is a little bit like sex. If you're not enjoying yourself, you're probably doing it wrong.
It's a fair point. So your first Cork O'Connor book, speaking of such things, came out in 1998. And the industry has changed so much since that time. I mean, the rise of ebooks and the winnowing down of the number of publishing houses, et cetera, et cetera. We could go on and on. And of course, the pandemic has had a tremendous influence in surprising ways. I think maybe we learned how much people really do like to read, but of course, it's changed the ability to go out and do these kinds of events in person, et cetera. Just many, many changes. Do you think the industry overall is better now for authors than it was when you had that first book come out in 1998? Has it become worse? Is it about the same, just different? How would you assess the industry right now?
There are some things that are easier for authors these days, and there are some challenges that will never change. What's easy is the digital age, digital technology has made it much easier for you to publish a novel. You don't necessarily have to go through the large publishing houses in New York City. There are all kinds of platforms you can use to self-publish. And self-publishing used to be viewed with such a jaded eye.
Mm-hmm.
vanity presses, that kind of thing. Well, let's not look that way anymore, because there are lots of fine books that people are putting out on their own or through small publishing houses that have arisen as a result of the internet and e-technology. Um, but some things never change. Fine, you get your book published, it looks great, it's terrific, it's out there on the internet. Well, how the hell is anybody going to know about your novel with the other 5 million books that are out there on the internet? So you're still confronted with that obstacle of promoting and marketing and all of that, getting your book into the hands of readers, and that continues to be a challenge. I think that in some ways the pandemic maybe has made that a little easier for writers, because none of us, I mean, there are those of us in the old days used to go on long book tours. In the old days, when I had a novel come out, I was on the road for 3 months doing 50, 60 events to promote the work. That's a very costly enterprise that I usually split the cost with my publisher on those things. Uh, but because nobody can do that now, we're doing uh, so many Zoom conferences, Zoom appearances, those kinds of things. And so we're all more on an equal footing than we used to be in the old days in that regard. So some things have changed for the better. Some things have not changed at all. And probably there are some things that have changed for the worse. I think the worst part of it, we won't really know fully until after we're out of the pandemic.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, change is always the one constant, right? And that's always, I guess, to be expected. And I do think, um, the self-publishing thing has become, as you noted, so much different. I just I have talked with several authors who had a fairly successful career in traditional publishing who have taken to self-publishing some of their works, building on because they have a built-in audience.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that's something somebody in your position would do, but is that something you're seeing as well?
Oh, sure. I have a lot of friends who have left traditional publishing for digital publishing, and there are very good reasons for them to do that. Um, I have no interest in doing that for a number of reasons. It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
Fir- First of all, um, for me, primarily, my job is to write the manuscript and then to help in promoting it in any way that I can. My publisher takes my work and they make it into a beautiful novel and they edit it and they do all kinds of wonderful things. They come up with marketing plans and all of that stuff. They get the reviews for me. So I don't have to do all of that work. Plus, I love my publishing house. I have been with Simon & Schuster Atria from the very beginning, and I have this relationship with them that I wouldn't trade for the world. So I feel a loyalty to them as well. So that's a part of why I stay where I am. But I just like what they do for me too.
oh, that's wonderful. Well, I like to end on what I hope is a fun question. I certainly mean for it to be a fun question. Let's say that I have the power to put you together for a nice long conversation with any one of the following three people. You tell me who you would choose and why. And the options that I'm going to give you are the great Ojibwe pitcher Albert Chief Bender, uh, the famed cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead, or the late guitar great Jimi Hendrix. One of those three people I could put you together with. Who would you choose and tell me why?
Margaret Mead, because when I was an undergraduate in college, cultural anthropology was my major. And that's one of the reasons that I have gravitated toward writing about the Ojibwe culture, a culture I needed to learn about and was fascinated by. And Margaret Mead just did so much in terms of helping us open our understanding to how other people in the world live and how valid that is for them to be the way they are, as opposed to the way we are.
Right, right. Well, William Kent Krueger, I want to say thank you again. I greatly appreciate it. I hope this wasn't too painful for you to come in and talk about writing with me
It
here
was
on the Open
delightful,
Mic.
Rich. It was just delightful. Thank you.
Great. Well, I love to hear that. I appreciate that very much. Again, for anyone who may not be familiar with Kent's books, I highly recommend them. Fabulous writer. one of the best you are ever going to read. Let me just be really frank here. Is going to be one of the best you'll ever read. And we're going to be watching for the new Cork O'Connor books as they come out over the next year or so. And certainly the new standalones too. I think we're all excited about that. So for those of you, please, if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button. Join me here again and very soon. We got a few more of these coming up in the near future. And we'll see you again next time on the Open Mic.